think we have everybody. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. All right, so I would like to call to order this study session of this Los Altos City Council on Tuesday, February 22nd at 5 p.m. Would the Deputy City Clerk please call roll and establish quorum?
Yes, members of the council, if you are here, please say aye. Councilmember Fleegor.
Here.
Councilmember Lee Ang.
Here.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Meadows.
Here.
Mayor Enander.
Here.
We are all present. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And do we have any members of the public present who would like to comment on the agenda topic? And we will be taking comments at this time and only at this time on the agenda topic.
Members of the public, please use the raise hand feature. Mayor, I see one person with their hand raised.
Go ahead. Let's give whoever wants to speak 3 minutes, please.
Sure. I am unmuting Terry. Terry, can you hear us?
Hi, it's Terry Couture. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm speaking as a citizen of Los Altos and not a Public Arts Commission member. In regards to the recommendation for staff to prepare public facilities bond in the form of a property tax, I strongly urge the council to use instead the sales tax as only 50% plus 1 is needed for voter approval, as opposed to the other, which requires 2/3. Additionally, a sales tax will broaden the reach of the contributors, including renters who live in Los Altos, visitors outside of Los Altos, professionals who work in Los Altos and spend money here while living elsewhere. Why is not the polling and surveys done already? That should have been conducted to understand the citizens of Los Altos's desire for increased property taxes. Many of the seniors in Los Altos have scrimped and saved for many years to finally buy a house in Los Altos after living elsewhere. They do not have the means for an increase, especially with the inflation numbers we are seeing and the uncertain future. A sales tax will lift the burden to all of us, not just property owners. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Mayor, I see one more person with their hand raised.
Okay, we'll take one more and then we will close public comment.
Sounds good. Roberta, can you?
Hi, this is Roberta. And I just want to say, I had no idea what Terry Couture was going to say, but I want to say ditto to her. There is a concern that I have that we went close to $1 million on that, and it failed. And I think that I think we need a police station desperately. So I want to start with that. But I do think also that the fact that there were no plans, I think you need to take the time to have plans to show the residents what they're going to get for the money that we're going to spend. I think you should keep it narrow and not just have it as a general bond to cover the fire department, police department, and other facilities. I think you need to be very specific and let the residents know how much it's going to cost them, because I am a senior and we have to watch every penny. We are suffering from inflation and gas taxes and trying to heat our homes in the winter here. And they also read the report, and you said that, we would probably have a AAA or a AA rating. I don't know where that came from, so I'd like an explanation of, if any studies was done on that. And I just think that you may be rushing the process, because if you do community outreach, you need to have something to bring to the community to show them what the plans are. And, it may be something that we want to wait until next year, because even spending $200,000, if you vote tonight to do that, what does that mean? Does that mean that money has to not go to having hot water at Grant Park, or have the electricity not working, or not pave our roads, or not contribute to CalPERS? I always find it very disturbing that big chunks of money are being discussed, being spent before you look at the CIP. And I think the sales tax idea is a good idea as far as making it broad, to get taxes from people who visit us as well as businesses, and not just have it as a property tax. And I don't understand if we have to put collateral up or not for a bond. So I couldn't understand that from the report. So I'm hoping that you'll discuss that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. And with that, we will close public comment. And at this time, I'd like to turn this over to the subcommittee, which is Vice Mayor Meadows and Councilmember Weinberg. It's all yours.
Okay, Madam Mayor, thank you very much. Before we get going, I think the Vice Mayor and I would like to extend a big thank you to a lot of people. First to you, Madam Mayor, for your commitment to allowing us to get this matter onto a study session, and as necessary, putting it on our agendas. I also want to issue a thank you to City Manager England and City Attorney Jolie, who has spent an awful lot of time with us. Director Furtado has also spent a lot of time with us. Really a tremendous amount of time has been given, and a lot of information has been disseminated and analyzed and discussed. And we would not even be at this point without the help of a lot of people. So again, thank you very much. What the subcommittee is asking from the City Council is a commitment to move forward with a ballot measure for a general obligation bond in order to a general obligation bond for the purpose of improving our public safety facilities. What we are asking for from the council is authority to move forward and an allocation of $200,000 from the general fund toward putting that measure on the November 2022 ballot. The subcommittee is recommending to the council that rather than take action on it tonight, we simply discuss the matter, we discuss the report that the subcommittee put together, and that we put this on our agenda for our next regular meeting in March. That way, the members of the council, as well as the public, will have a couple of weeks to think about everything that's been said. We can chew and digest what's been said and discuss it again after having time to reflect. So the report that the subcommittee put together is very dense. There are a lot of details and there are a lot of options. We are not expecting this council to have the very deep in the woods, deep in the weeds type of an understanding that the Vice Mayor and I are just now really starting to understand. What we are hoping for is the council to look at this from a high level and to give policy direction. Now, if we decide to move forward with a bond measure at our next regular meeting, that is not an irreversible road. There is a lot more information that the subcommittee and the council are going to need to obtain and absorb. And if it turns out that we think it doesn't make sense to move forward with the bond measure in November of 2022, then we can put a pause on things and decide how and when we want to move forward in the future. If we decide that we want to move forward with something other than a general obligation bond, or whatever type of a bond this council decides that it wants to authorize in a couple of weeks, assuming that we do have that authorization, we can then make that change. What the subcommittee has come to understand is that there are a lot of details and there's a lot more information that we need. And in order to get those details, in order to obtain that information, we're at the point where we need to bring experts on board. There simply is not enough expertise among the subcommittee and among staff to really be able to direct us where we should go. Now, the report that we put together identified several consultants that the city will need to hire. There are the investment bankers, of course, who are the ones who would ultimately issue the bonds, assuming a bond measure was passed. A financial advisor is someone who would advocate on behalf of the city. They're the ones who are going to work with the investment bankers who are, they're working with us, but they're not our advocate. The financial advisor would be our advocate. We also are going to need some kind of a campaign consultant to help us put together the right type of message and really understand what it is the public wants and what it is the public would support. We understand that the campaign manager would be in the best position to retain a pollster and to poll the residents of Los Altos to really get an understanding of what it is the residents feel we need and what it is the residents would support in terms of a bond measure. With that information in hand, we would then be in a position to direct staff to actually put together the bond measure, and with council's approval, then submit it to the county so that it's on the November 2022 ballot. So again, it's important to say that what the subcommittee is hoping is that the council is going to look at this from a very high level and decide in 2 weeks whether we want to move forward with further investigation. Now, the subcommittee is recommending that we move forward with a very specific direction, the general obligation bonds. So when staff goes out to try to retain these specialists, to retain these experts have an understanding of where we're coming from. But again, if the experts come in and say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, I don't think this is going to work, or it was a good idea, but here's what the polling shows, we can then pivot, we can then change direction and put together a strategy that we as a council believe is going to be the most successful going forward. But having some kind of direction at this initial stage to the experts so they understand what it is we want to accomplish is going to be an important part of the process of retaining the experts to help us. Another expert that we're going to need to retain is bond counsel. This is an attorney who specializes in public finance and putting bond measures on the ballot. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to the vice mayor. I know I said we hope that the council looks at this from a high level, but there are a lot of details here. And we try to disseminate those details in the forms of various charts. So Sally is going to go ahead and take over and give the council a better understanding of what some of those details are that we hope will make up the policy that we move forward with.
Thank you, Councilmember Weinberg. And I'm going to ask Deputy Clerk Rodriguez, do you have the ability to pull up the report?
I should be able to call it up. Give me a quick second.
Yeah, because I don't, it's bad enough looking at tables, but it's even worse not looking at them when you're trying to describe how to read them and what examples they show. So I hope you can, because I don't actually have it on this device. So I should have thought of that. But I do want to pick up where Councilmember Weinberg left off. This exercise is a little bit like the proverbial chicken and egg. And so we had to come up with what looked at to us with first pass, the work that we did, what looked like the best recommendation, to then go get an expert to help us really understand what the best recommendation is. And I will say that the examples I'm about to walk you through are the ones that the investment bankers showed us as the most realistic. Sales tax wasn't felt to be the most realistic in terms of some of the potential amounts we'd need to raise. But again, all that detailed work will be coming up in the future. Thank you. I see that we have this in front of us. So if you could make that just a little bit bigger, as I always say, thank you. And then take us to the tables, which is Appendix A.
Am I close?
No, not really. It's closer, since it's Appendix A, it's closer to, it's still further. It's still further. It's there you go. Okay. So I'm going to focus on these as examples just to help the public understand, and all of us understand. It helps me every time I go through it, actually, to understand what we're trying to do and the magnitude of what we might want to do. So there's actually two boxes here, Angel. I don't know if you could get them both, sort of. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay, thank you. And so these are different scenarios. And I want to walk you through what these scenarios shows us. There's two boxes, but they're really trying to get at the same thing. One is current market conditions with no real growth rate built in. And the bottom table is current market conditions with, say, a 1% growth rate over the time period when we might be issuing a bond. And the way you would look at this table is along the top, you see something called project funds. And that's really the amount that we, as a council, after we go through all the work, would decide that we need to raise for the project that we want to do. And so you can see in both these tables, it talks about a $25 million project, a $50 million, or a $100 million project. All these are hypothetical. We're not advocating any of them necessarily. I'm just trying to help illustrate the exercise we're going to be trying to go through. On the left column in both those tables, it talks about terms, and that's talking about the terms of the bond. So for example, if you look at the bottom table, you see we have a circle around 2.97 million. And what that example shows us is that if we're trying to raise $50 million for a project, and we're anticipating a 1% growth rate over the next year, perhaps due to inflation or whatever, and we looked at a 30-year term on a bond, then for that $50 million over 30 years, we'd need to raise annually 2.97 million, let's call it 3 million, for the purposes of serving that bond, paying back that bond that we're going to borrow. Looking at that same table, if you looked at a $25 million bond at a 20-year term, you can see it shows 1.85 million. So that shows us that our revenue stream to pay back the bond over 20 years for a $25 million project is 1.85 million annually. So, so this is how the investment bankers will look at this. This is how we're all going to look at it when we bring this level of detail to you. We're not doing that tonight. We're just getting you used to the thinking. And then Deputy Clerk, if you could roll down to the next page. Keep in mind that example I showed you of the $2.97 million annually. You can see it here again. $2.97 million over 30 years allows us to pay back a $50 million bond in a 1% inflationary period, or 1% growth period, I should say. And so, Angel, yeah, there's three different scenarios we're going to talk about now. So it's okay if that 2.97 million disappears. Thanks. That's perfect. Oh, perfect. Perfect, Angel. So how could we think about raising that $3 million annually over 30 years? And what our potential investment banker has laid out is three different tax vehicles by which to do this. And these are just examples. So the first example is one that we've tentatively recommended to you tonight as what initially seems like a logical way to go. So the first one, the green box, the general obligation bond, which is a levy on the property taxes, would raise $3.07 million annually. And that's based on, we scrolled a little past it. Actually, sorry, Angel, could I ask you go up a little bit? Keep the green, go up, up, up. Okay, so here's some basic information about Los Altos, which I found very interesting. So we have 11,270 parcels for an assessed valuation across those parcels of close to $19 billion. And so these are some of the numbers that were then driving the calculations I'm about to walk you through. I should have started with that. So, so when you go back down to that green box and see how we're talking about a property tax, it turns out that actually 1.72 million is the average single family resident assessed value. which you calculate from our total assessed value and the number of parcels. And so you can then do the calculation, which the investment banker did, to show that if you assess at $15.82 per 100,000, then we would raise on the average single family resident $272.80, and that adds up to $3.07 million annually. So remember, in this exercise, with each of these tax methods that we're talking about, they're targeting the $3 million that we need in that $50 million 30-year term scenario. That may not be where we end up, but that's the example I'm illustrating for you now. We also, they also looked at a property tax and I'm sorry, a parcel tax. And in this case, they've looked at a flat parcel tax rather than a square footage based parcel tax. But this would work out to be $263 annually per parcel. Again, those 11,270 parcels, which would raise $2.96 million annually. And then finally, I'll take you through one last example they did. I don't have a sales tax example to show you. They didn't think that that was going to raise in this amount of money, but again, we can look at it more closely. If you looked at the user utility tax, you could raise about $2.8 million annually if we increased our UUTs about 3% over our current rates, which are 2.5% to 3.5%, depending on the utility. We didn't particularly like the sound of that. We won't go into the reasons now, but that too could get you close to that $2.97 million. So I realize that's kind of a lot of math to throw at you. It's not, the point isn't the math so much, but to say in the scenario, if we look at trying to raise $3 million annually over 30 years for a $50 million project, these are some of the methods we could use to reach and finance that amount of money. So I'll stop with these examples. I've probably confused everybody more than helped clarify, but I don't know do we want to take questions as we go along, or what do you think, Councilmember Weinberg?
I think it makes sense just to open up to questions at this point. Let's see where the council wants to go with it.
Can I ask my first question would be, do you have other parts of presentation that you want to do?
Well, it may not hurt. It may be helpful to go through it from the beginning, I think, or do. I mean, everyone's had a chance to read it. We didn't create slides. We're just working off of the report. So I don't know what would everyone find most helpful.
Well, is there any other core information you want to review before we start talking?
I don't think there's any core information that we want to go into. I mean, there may be some strategy and broader procedural concepts that we can get into, which I think will be a natural part of the conversation.
It might be helpful to go to that big table, which is probably on the page 7, Deputy Clerk, because that does show 5 other revenue sources that could be used. That one is where sales tax shows up. And Jonathan, I don't know if you want to speak to that or.
Sure. So these are the 5 taxes that Stifel thought could potentially raise enough money for us to move forward to raise enough revenue to move forward with a new police station and other improvements that we want to make to our public facilities. Now, let's back up a second and understand that the premise that the subcommittee is working from is that we absolutely need a new police facility. So the council can choose to move forward with a new police facility or raise money to rehabilitate the one we have, or we could simply ignore it, in which case things are just going to get worse and worse and we'll be following the city's pattern of kind of maintaining to failure. We may be very close to that point with the police station right now. So assuming that the council wants to move forward with replacing or seriously rehabilitating the police station, we're going to have to come up with a source of money to do that. And there are three ways that we can raise money. One is the city can issue a bond, and in which case we would use the bond to, it's the municipal equivalent of taking out a loan, and the city would pay interest on those bonds. The second option that the city has is to just go directly to a commercial lender. Now, the advantage of going to a commercial lender is that the council can elect to do that on its own. We don't need the approval of the voters. But a commercial lender is going to charge us more than we would pay on a bond. So a bond measure is going to cost the city less money in the long run. The other advantage to a bond is that we're putting this matter before the voters. We're not simply making a unilateral action that is going to encumber the city's financial means for the next 30 or 40 years, 50 years, maybe more. By going to the voters, we're saying, hey, we need money for this reason, and we want you to approve us. We want you to approve the process of raising money through this type of a tax, whether it's a new tax or an increase in another tax. The third option we have is to introduce some kind of austerity to the city. The city can decide we're going to find the revenues that we have, we're going to find the money out of the revenues that we currently have. And in order to do that, we're going to have to cut an awful lot of services that the city is already providing. The subcommittee certainly believes that issuing a bond is the best of those three options. And that's why we're at this point. Now, the investment banker that we spoke with, Stifel, suggested that a property tax, a special tax, a sales tax, a parcel tax, or a utility user tax are the 5 candidates that would probably raise enough money to at least be able to build a replacement police facility. But taxes are not all created equal. So the utility user tax, like the vice mayor said, there were a number of reasons that it didn't look appealing to us. One of it is that utility user taxes seem to be in decline. People are finding other ways of maintaining their communications. They're cutting the cord. We saw that as, among other problems, we saw that as kind of a diminishing return. A property tax, on the other hand, is something that is more likely to increase in value over time. As properties turn over and they're sold and the assessed value increases, so is the level of property taxes that we're going to raise. That was appealing to us. We don't believe that a sales tax is going to be able to generate enough revenue to really support a police facility, or let alone the other things that we want to be able to use the money for. And look, let's face it, Los Altos has a lot of needs. If we don't raise enough money to accomplish our goals, we're going to be right back where we are here today. And we don't want to have to come back in 5 years or 10 years and say, look, the sales tax was great, we're raising a lot of money, but it's not enough to support everything that we had hoped to accomplish. Now what do we do? Another advantage of the property tax is that
I'm going to do a different one if that's a problem. Stop whining. I'm on a call.
Another advantage of the property tax is that we have a little bit of flexibility in who the property.
So you don't interrupt my meeting.
We can have a carve out that allows some kind of an exception for people of modest means. That makes it a little bit more equitable. I guess finally, one of the things that the subcommittee considered is when it comes to property taxes, and I don't have numbers for you, but when it comes to property taxes, the ones that have been most successful have usually been the ones that are supporting a public safety facility. Rehabilitating or replacing public safety facilities tend to be the most popular capital projects amongst the community, and therefore they have the greatest chance of reaching that 2/3 threshold. There may be something else that the council in the future or a future council wants to raise money for. And it may not be as popular as a new police station or replacing the roofs on fire departments. In which case it would be nice to have the possibility of a 50% plus one tax kind of in the council's back pocket.
Thank you very much, council member. I'm going to make a trial run at something here. It seems to me that at the high level, which is what you're asking for, there are some critical questions that you're asking us to answer. The first one, and I'm glad you laid out those three options of bond, loan, or austerity, is should we try to identify a new revenue source? And you've given a number of options, but should we try to identify a new revenue source, or do we want to pursue a posterity approach? So that's one, seems to me, pretty clear binary question of a sort. The second is, what should it cover? Are we trying to cover one building? Are we trying to cover more than that? If so, what's the more than that? And again, I think this can be not just binary, but this is iterative in terms of what would certain things cost. And therefore, if we throw that one in the kitty, then into the list of projects to be considered to be covered by this new source, if we're going to pursue a new source, you know, how big is that? And do we still think we can swallow that number? So I'm going to call that one scope. The third one is the period. Do we want, you know, what period would we be looking at? That's getting down a little bit into details on the financing of whether we're wanting to look at a 20-year, a 30-year, a 40-year. Although I think that a sales tax may or may not have a period. It doesn't always have to have a period with it, I don't believe. I think, and I'm not sure about the others. And then fourth would be kind of which tax do we think fits best with those above three questions, and kind of what timing, and can we do this within the timing we're talking about? And then last, and I got this from part of what's in here and part of what I know from other sources, would be if we were going to go forward, and this is kind of a down the road, we might not want to broach this one tonight, is would we want to have an advisory measure if we were doing a parcel or property tax that was not tied to a specific project? Would we still want to have potentially an advisory measure on how the funds would be spent? So I think in trying to distill the very, as you said, a very complex report, those seem like the key questions. Have I missed anything?
You've actually done a great job of capturing the variables, which highlights the complexity, because each of those variables can move, you know, amongst themselves, if you want to put it that way. So it's very complex. Councilmember.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with everything that the vice mayor just said, with one small caveat, which is that we can go down this line of analysis and try to answer each of these individual questions. But the component we're still missing is true high-level practical expertise that will be able to tell us this is what will work and this is what won't work. This is what you do need. This is a trap. This is the way to look at it. A general obligation bond may not make sense or be practical to have an advisory measure with a general obligation bond. Those are the types of questions that I think we're going to need bond counsel to really be able to give us a definitive answer. So I think it's appropriate for the council to discuss this. And if it's the will of the council, a motion can include all of these components. I would simply ask that the council be flexible as we get more information from the experts that are going to guide us and work with us along the way. It may be necessary to pivot.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that you need expert advice along the way. And I don't think we are headed toward any sort of motion or action. Don't think that would actually be in order for a study session. So I'm glad that you have planned for this to come back to us in 2 weeks, I'd like to proceed on discussion, and I'm going to leave it to my colleagues and see kind of who wants, if anybody wants to go first, whether whether you want to ask questions of, maybe that's the first thing to do, is to say, do you have questions, kind of operating questions or content questions for your colleagues before we start into discussion? So I'm going to look at council members Flagger and Lee Eng and say, do either of you have questions, or are you ready to have discussion? Councilmember Lee Eng, I see your hand up, so please go ahead.
I want to thank Vice Mayor Meadows, as well as Councilmember Weinberg, for the report and all the work they have done. Thank you so much. I know how much work this is and how much information it is, how much time it takes to gather all this information. I do have a few questions on this, and I think I need way more. I need a few more information. You asked for 200,000, but later on in the report, you were stating that it might cost 200,000 to 300,000. You have a breakdown of all the various. You have it listed on page 1 on who we needed, and you did a short description on what their roles were. But do you know the cost of each one of those consultants or counsel?
Specifically, no, we don't have those costs. That $200,000 to $300,000 figure was given to us by both the investment banker and the city manager, who has worked on bond measures in other municipalities. So we're taking that as the general universe in which we're working. Given all the expert advice that needs to go into this and all the experts that need to be retained, it would be shocking to me if we could get this done for less than $200,000. So the $200,000 initial outlay is something we expect to cover a lot, hopefully the majority of the costs moving forward. But I would expect that at some point the city staff will be coming back saying, we need more, we're going to need more money in order to bring this thing to the voters in November. And I think that it would be appropriate if the city manager, I guess, would agree to advise the council as to what the costs are incurred as we're moving forward.
And then that said, to clarify that, I have a question in regard to that, to the city manager. I was, in your experiences as well, working on ballot measures, and is this something that we really need a poster, or is this something that you feel that our staff can do surveys or gather information as to what direction the public would be interested in?
Councilmember Lee Yang, I think we would want.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Are you able to hear me now?
You're still a little faint. If you've got a volume control you can turn up, I think that'd be helpful.
I'm at 100%. So this may not, if this isn't coming through, let me call in, then I can answer that.
No, you're better now. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I'll leave my screen off. Maybe that helped. Councilmember Lee Yang, I do think engaging a pollster would be a very important step to help lead to success of any ballot measure that council put on.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My other questions are, so why are lease revenue bonds needed for the sales tax or parcel tax measure? Can you help me understand that? I think it's also something that the public had inquired about earlier.
I think the short answer to your question is, if we don't use a lease revenue bond, then we have to have a second type of a measure to issue the appropriate type of bond. So by not going with the lease revenue bond for a sales tax, you're then requiring us to put on at least two measures. maybe even a third measure if we're going to need an advisory, if we want an advisory measure to go along with it. Whereas if we use lease revenue bonds, then we only have to have the one measure.
It's in one of the obscure footnotes at the end of the table with the 5 different kind of tax options. It says that to
Secured by
avoid,
general fund.
yeah, so if you look at the 4 of the option, no, sorry, 3 of the options that talk about the type of bond being a lease revenue bond, it says to avoid additional voter approval, city-owned assets must be leased, unless you want to, as Councilmember Weinberg said, put another bond measure. It would become a 2-step process. So that's the common way that that's done. And hopefully I'm explaining that correctly. I haven't seen city manager pop up on screen, so.
So when you say that and you put your assets on, okay. Then we already have our library utilized as an asset. So then the next asset that we would be looking to utilize is our community center if we were to pursue that route.
So Councilmember Liang, I think these are some of the questions that the experts would provide an answer to. My assumption is that the facility itself after built would also act as a collateral, but I would need to defer to Stiefel on that.
Okay, thank you so much. And so I'm going to move on to the schedule that you have listed. So you have the schedule listed, and that looks like that we would be going out to the public for outreach, as well as, let me pull up the schedule page. Outreach and community engagement in April. Are you anticipating that it would only take us 1 month to come up with the design to present to the public as we seek outreach or engagement? Because then we would have to have the design finalized by the end of March, which would be our second meeting in March. So can you help me understand that?
So the design, no. I don't think that there is going to be a final design approved by the council and presented to the voters. This is it. This is the project that we anticipate moving forward with. That being said, I know that city staff is working to put together a very detailed analysis of what the expected cost would be to build a police station. This is not the same as a community center, which maybe it'll have a pool and maybe it'll have underground parking. This is a facility that is much more, it's much smaller in scope. And the idea that the understanding of what it is that we need at a minimum and what we would like above and beyond the minimum is much easier to identify. Police stations are being built in other parts of the Bay Area and the state. Campbell, which is a city of approximately the same size as Los Altos, recently built a police station that the city passed a general obligation bond, like Sally and I are recommending today. And their police station is 2 stories, it's on their civic center, and it costs in the range of $30 million. Prices are going up, so I would assume that if we anticipated building the same facility for Los Altos that Campbell built, it would cost several $1 million more to do. That's a reflection of inflation and the cost of construction today. But kind of a long way of me saying we're not going to have plans to show the public, but we will have a very detailed description of what it is the city anticipates building, because we can very easily identify what the city needs in terms of a new police facility. And city manager, I'm going to put you on the spot. Did I answer that properly? Is that what staff intends to bring to us?
Councilmember Weinberg, that's correct. You've described for the police facility If council does determine that expanding the scope of the bond to all public facilities is in order, then we will bring back a similar analysis for the other areas.
So when you are planning to do public outreach and public engagement, I'm not quite sure what exactly we are hoping to gather. Is your request then, I mean, help me understand that.
I'll take a stab at that if you want, Councilmember Weinberg. And again, City Manager, feel free to jump in. So this would help us understand, to some extent, the scope that we may have narrowed it down more so by the time we get to that, but the messaging for the language of the bond measure. So we all probably remember getting phone calls as past bond measures have been put on in the city, and they would ask us, or like the school boards do, which message is most compelling for you? What's most important to you to consider in supporting a bond? And so that's really the type of research, and maybe City Manager England would like to add on to that.
You've got it correct, Vice Mayor. The polling and the outreach would be determine what residents will and will not support, what they find compelling. Will also, to what Councilmember Weinberg said earlier, help determine the types of taxes, property versus parcel, that they may prefer. So I think the outreach and the feedback is an opportunity to really gauge what it is the residents will find value in.
Okay. My next question is, so has the public safety groups, have you any outreach been conducted with the public safety groups and their input taken?
My recollection is that Chief Galea sat in on our first meeting with staff. I think it would make sense once the bond measure passes and we're at the point where we're going to start developing the details of the new facility. At that point, I think we're going to want not just the chief's input, but the association's input as well.
And isn't it also true that the chief, or potentially Captain Kraus, since I see she's on the line tonight, or others are involved with staff working to make sure we understand the elements of the station that would need to be included? So that's my understanding, but again, City Manager England can correct.
That's correct, Vice Mayor Meadows. Staff has been involved with the architect to do a space review, a needs analysis, items like that. Again, before we would do a more formal outreach to public safety support groups or the community in general, we'd really need to know the scope that council was looking at. Again, if it's police only, that's one road. If it's a public facility, that's another road where we would have to engage a greater number of stakeholders.
Okay. A couple more questions is, it was asked tonight about our bond rating. How do we know what rating our bonds are? And what is it based on?
So if the subcommittee is okay, I'd like to let John Kim answer that question.
Good evening, council members. My name is John Kim. I'm a managing director here at Stiefel in the Los Angeles office. And it's a great question with respect to bond credit ratings. There are a couple of rating agencies in the country that rate the vast majority of municipalities when they go to issue a bond. Both Standard & Poor's and Moody's come to mind. They typically look at the size of the community, per capita income, the overall management of the community, as well as the diversity of your revenue base, as well as the amount of debt you currently hold. We at Stiefel have done a lot of ratings in California for many, many years and have predictive models that we've used based on the criteria that are publicly listed by both Standard & Poor's and Moody's. And based on our review of your financials and other operating data, we would estimate that your current rating would be in the AA category, potentially AAA category for any general obligation bond debt and even general fund-backed lease revenue bond debt that you would issue. So that analysis is something that we had performed in providing that feedback.
Thank you so much. So that means you might have provided the data on the last page regarding ballot measure results. So when you talked about the parcel tax measures, that only 4 of the 7 measures were not approved, were they all school parcel tax measures, or were any of those parcel taxes that were studied done for public safety or other services? And can
That's
you
a great question.
understand that?
Absolutely, Councilmember Liang. When we looked at this information, we drew information from Michael Coleman, who is the fiscal advisor to the League of California Cities. Mr. Coleman puts together annual studies of ballot measures held by California municipalities. We looked at the most recent election cycle that was the most prevalent, which was the November 2020 election. And we looked at ballot measures in relation to parcel taxes for non-school purposes. So obviously a lot of school districts around the state utilize parcel taxes to fund operations. And that's the most prevalent use of parcel taxes, but there are also cities and counties and special districts that also use parcel taxes as a way to raise additional tax revenue for operations. The vast majority of those non-school parcel tax ballot measures have been for public safety purposes, either police, fire, or EMT services, some of which have been for operational costs, that is to pay for salaries and other costs of employment versus capital, but some have also been for capital, whether it be for equipment, fire trucks, police cars, and the like.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think, let me double check to make sure I got all my questions. My question to the mayor is, I know that this is a recommendation that's come from the subcommittee, but we're going to have further discussion on if we think another option might be better. Is that correct?
We're going to have further discussion once we've answered any questions that Councilmember Flagler and I have in addition to the ones you've already asked.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Flagler.
Thank you, Mayor, and let me echo the thanks to the subcommittee, consultant staff, and everybody else who has worked on this. As everybody else has said, this is a lot of work and you have done a lot of it to date, so really want to thank you. I do have several questions because I am trying to understand what exactly the subcommittee is recommending and why. Because even just listening to this discussion, it still isn't clear to me. So let me start with that basic question. Is the subcommittee recommending a general public facility measure, or is this subcommittee recommending a special measure solely for the police facility?
The former.
The former. Okay. And if we were to go out with the general obligation bond and we did not do the advisory piece of it where we identify the different facilities and it passes, how and who would determine then if it's not specific for Chief Galea has his audio on. Could you explain that process if it's the general public facilities path?
So my understanding is that a general obligation bond is going to specify the range of projects in which the money can be used. And looking at it, I think from a higher level, putting together the bond measure, the measure itself, and the text that goes in front of the voters on the ballot and in the voter pamphlet, there is a science to it, and there is a checklist of what must go in as a matter of law. But there is also a component of art. This is as much an art as it is a science. And I see that I'm confusing the mayor, but the benefit of a political consultant working with bond counsel is that the political consultant will help us to identify what it is the voters expect to get out of a tax increase and how it should be presented to the voters. So there's going to be a lot of time and effort that goes into crafting what goes onto the ballot measure, specifically what goes onto the actual ballot. And the political consultant and the bond counsel are going to look, they're going to combine a number of considerations here, right? They're going to look at what it is the city, the council is hoping to accomplish with this tax, what it is the residents are willing to support an increased tax to get, and what it is that an attorney for someone who doesn't like a new tax might put in a complaint to say, hey, you guys didn't follow the proper procedure for what it is you're trying to do. So those are three very important considerations. And that's why I say that this is an art as much as it is a science. And how we craft the message that is being put in front of the electorate is really going to determine the scope of what it is that we're going to be able to do with the funds.
No, I agree. And that's down the road. I'm just really trying to understand where we are today. So along the same lines of this being a proposed general public facility measure, we've spent time and in the report as well talking about a possible design for a police station, but it's not a special police facility measure. So I'm trying to understand here again, as part of the communication to the community where it's a public facility measure, and knowing what we went through with the EOC design, which took many meetings, I'm curious if part of the community engagement and presenting potential designs and elements of a potential facility, if that would also include other public facilities, or would we solely present a design for the police station?
I think the question that I'm hearing from you is, are we going to have cost estimates for other things that we want to do with the bond?
Yes, because I think it was Campbell, the estimate is 30 million, and that's what we were looking at. But I'm curious about, as we present and communicate, since this is a public facility, a general public facility bond, not specific to just our police station, how are we going to communicate that and communicate the other potential uses?
Yeah. So,
and this could just be something you could say, we'll look into that. But I'm just, as I listen, I think, on the one hand, I'm hearing it's a general public facility, but then there's a lot of focus on one facility over another. And I think we could address that through the advisory measure, but just something to think about. Another question I have is also to better understand the subcommittee's thinking in recommending the property tax over, possibly the sales tax. And what I'm hearing, I want to make sure is one of the primary reasons is we think we would be able to generate the necessary revenue from the property tax versus the sales tax. Because I can tell you, I'm apprehensive about the 2/3 versus the 50% plus one, and also some other concerns about who gets assessed with the property tax versus the sales tax. But if one of the subcommittee members could again just explain, is that the primary reason you're recommending the property tax? And could we have a longer period for the sales tax to generate the revenue necessary?
So let me add another thought to that. So in addition to, our sales tax base is not our biggest revenue generator, as we all know. That is property taxes. We also felt that a distinct disadvantage. We all know California, Santa Clara County, highly taxed already. There's a cap to what you can charge. And so I think that is part of the concern about whether you could actually achieve enough through a sales tax. Additionally, do we really want to put a higher cost basis on our merchants, on our restaurants, where people say, oh, it cost me less to eat in Mountain View, or I'm going to go shop in Palo Alto. It's just really does not seem like the right time to disincent people from spending money in our 7 shopping districts. I mean, to me, that was really an important point. But, again, I do think, that tonight, again, there's so many variables. It's been really hard to get our hands around all of it. Maybe one way to think about all of this is, do we want you to stop tonight, subcommittee? And if we don't want you to stop, then what do we need? What questions do we need answered? Rather than, yes, we want you to do this, focusing on, yes, if we want you to move ahead, these are the questions we need answered, because we are flexible on all the recommendations we've made because we need more expert input, and everyone's asking really great questions, and we ask them of ourselves too. So I went a little bit afield from your sales tax question, but I saw real disadvantages, both public perception wise, whether it had a term or didn't have a term, and also for burdening our commercial and retail. It does not seem like good timing for that.
No, thanks, Vice Mayor. And I know the mayor said we'll have a wrap-up discussion on where we go from here, because I do think maybe one of the things we could do is tweak the recommendation where, you come back to us, baby, we say March on, but we need more information before we make a definitive decision. So with regards to the property tax, and I think Councilmember Weinberg touched on this earlier, where you can have carve-outs, for example, for residents with modest means. What part of the process would we make that call on? We don't want to assess all properties. We want to carve out for seniors, residents with modest means. Where does that come in as part of the process if we wanted to consider that? Thanks, Mayor.
I'll take a first stab at that. So in all those tables that I walked everyone through, when we get closer to the point where we firmed up some of the variables and we want to start doing the exact calculations, that's where they do some of the financial modeling, I think, to come up with recommendations. I should also mention that we do think parcel tax deserves some further exploration, possibly, because it has some advantages compared to property tax. Though again, you see it on your property tax bill, but it's a slightly different mechanism. But so anyway, I'll open that up to Councilmember Weinberg. He probably has more to add to that question.
Thank you. I think the Vice Mayor gave a good answer. The only thing that I would add to it is, it strikes me that it would make sense to come to that decision, that vision early. so that when we're going out to our experts, we're going to the experts with an understanding of what it is the council expects in terms of the most important parts of what this tax is going to do. So if we want to include a carve out for people of modest means, certainly there has to be financial modeling to determine at what level we start to erode our ability to generate enough funds to accomplish our goals. But it's important that the experts know, I think, as soon as possible, what it is that we want to present to the voters, as opposed to having them put package together and then we're just trying to kind of round off the corners a little bit and we come up with something that really is going to affect the amount of money that's going to be raised or how it's going to be raised or when it's going to be raised. So I think that specific carve out for people of modest means, I think that's something that we should decide early on rather than later.
And then just a couple more questions, Mayor, on the project fund amount. And I know, again, going back to, I think Campbell, where it was around 30 million for their basic police facility. Does the subcommittee or experts have an idea of what that project fund, recommended project fund amount would be, knowing what we're trying to accomplish here? Nope. Okay. And then on the revenue source, I know Councilmember Weinberg touched on 3 potential sources, but I'm curious whether or not the subcommittee also considered, and everybody's looking at it. I don't know if it has $30 million for Los Altos, but for example, the infrastructure bill, the federal infrastructure bill, or other funding sources to subsidize or fully fund this project.
It's not something I think that we have discussed directly. I think that all of us, not just as council members, but as residents of the city, are simply expecting staff to have their eyes open for any sort of grants, federal, state, I mean, whatever is available that's out there, to help subsidize any project that's available to us. If there are specific grants that might be available for public infrastructure, specifically public safety or seismic upgrades, things like that, it is not something that we have discussed at this point. This may be a little bit of a tangent, but the subcommittee does see something of an urgency here. If we're going to go with a general obligation bond, we're looking at doing it in November of 22 or 24. And there are 2 important considerations to think about if we're debating whether to move forward now or later. The first is interest rates are rising. And it is almost assured that the longer we take to commit to some source of revenue to move forward with what we know needs to happen, the more money it's going to cost the city in terms of interest. The second important consideration is our public facilities are not in good shape. Our police officers don't have air conditioning. Our 911 servers are on pallets in a basement because the basement floods. Seismic upgrades, ADA upgrades are needed to other facilities. I mean, there is an urgency here. And the longer we wait, the more likely that the city courts catastrophe. Now, that is not to say that the subcommittee wants to move ahead with reckless abandon. Quite the contrary. What we want is a general understanding of whether this council is committed to getting the information we need to really determine whether or not it makes sense to put some kind of a measure on the ballot in 2022, because we've kind of hit the limit of what we're able to learn and disseminate.
Thanks, Councilmember Weinberg. And my last question for now, Just on the polling piece, Los Altos unfortunately does not have a good history with passing bond measures. And so I'm trying to reconcile the polling piece with the timeline and also expending at a minimum of 200,000. I would appreciate hearing, what the thinking is there, because my inclination would be, let's do the polling as soon as possible before expending other funds if the polling is going to tell us not now. And so one of subcommittee members could just explain, where does the polling fit in to the timeline? And then also the consultants, investment banker, bond counsel, all these other things and how they fit into the bigger picture. I'd really appreciate it. And that's my last question for now.
Nisa, I think that you absolutely hit the nail on the head with how important it is for us to go forward with a useful poll so that we can identify whether the project makes sense. And we want the polling data done as quickly as possible. So if things don't turn out the way that we're expecting them to, or that we hope them to, we can pull the plug on investing any more money in something that really that does not turn out to be feasible. I think that prior councils have tinkered with polls that have tinkered with polls and had their fingers on the types of questions that were asked and the way the questions were analyzed that were not necessarily to the benefit of the city. It's my hope, and I'll let Sally speak for herself, but it's my hope that if we're going to spend the money to hire the professionals to give us honest, objective advice, we're going to give them the space that they need to do their jobs. So once a political consultant is hired, I think that it makes the most sense to let that consultant work with a pollster that they know and design the poll for what they know the council wants to accomplish and administer that poll as quickly as possible, as opposed to the council insisting on having control over that poll and giving us the opportunity to turn it into something different. I don't think that is going to be in the best interest of the city. I think that is a road that prior councils have gone down that has not worked out well. That being said, I just don't know that it's practical to say, okay, we're going to hire the political consultant and let them do the polling before we engage in any other piece of the puzzle. I just think that there's other experts that are going to have to be engaged to help the political consultant understand what is the universe of tools and options that are before the city, that are before the council, and getting that information to the consultant so they understand what the pollster should be looking for. I will say that when it comes to the investment banker does not cost the city anything upfront. The investment banker is only going to take a fee when the bond measure passes, and then that fee is I believe, a percentage.
Councilmember Liang, did you have a follow-up question?
I do have a couple follow-up questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, can you move them along quickly, please?
Okay, Mr. Kim, thank you so much again for answering questions earlier. So your organization, exactly what does it do and how many other perhaps parcel tax or sales tax measures have you been involved with? I missed that in the report and I didn't see it. So I might have had an oversight on that. Help me understand.
Absolutely. So as investment bankers, when municipalities or school districts or college districts ask us to work on a ballot measure, we assist with city staff and the rest of the community in developing an overall strategic plan, as well as a public information plan to put together the wants and desires of the community as it relates to funding a project or services in that community. So all of the things that Vice Mayor Meadows and Councilmember Weinberg spoke to with respect to defining the project, defining the scope, how much it's going to cost, what is the mechanism of collection, working with the attorneys and legal experts to determine what is allowable under state laws and other considerations for putting that tax measure together are some of the things that we do as we help a community put together the framework for raising the revenue. And then once that's done, obviously getting public input, whether it be from the registered voters or the property owners, whatever the mechanism is for collection of the tax, we would work with the pollster as well as the campaign consultant to help solicit that feedback and analyze what that feedback is telling the city and the community. From there, we would then work with the attorneys to craft the language and to forge the most viable pathway forward, and then help the city qualify that ballot measure to be placed on the next countywide ballot, or if need be, by special election held by the city and paid for by the city. The last thing that we would do is during the course of the whole process, of course, public information is critical, and we would help craft political information, public information that would be available for the project, you know, what the collection method is. That is all to help educate the community and the constituents on what the purpose of the ballot measure is, what it's going to fund, and so forth. We would also make ourselves available during public meetings, community meetings, to be another expert to help answer technical questions with respect to that ballot measure. So all of that happens to qualify the ballot measure, to define its scope, and then the voters speak to whether or not that ballot measure will be passed. Assuming it is passed, at that point, then the next phase of our work would take place, which is putting the bond measure together, bond issuance together, getting a credit rating, putting together with the lawyers all the legal documents, and then selling that debt to outside investors to raise the funds.
Okay, I think I wanted more so information on how successful you have been in the past and how many measures have you put on. It sounds like you've presented us with mostly parcel tax information and not sales tax measures. And can I get more information on that? Because right here, yeah, it hasn't listed, the data hasn't listed sales taxes that pass. And I had done some research and I pulled up some cities that have sales tax measures for public safety and their successes they've had. So, and I think that's a component that has been missing from this report as well. So
absolutely,
help me understand how many successes your company has had in implementing these taxes.
Absolutely. So for the last 10 years, Stifel has been the #1 public finance investment banking firm in the state when ranked by the number of issues. We've been the #1 firm helping school districts across the state in implementing not only their geo bonds, but other types of measures. We've also worked with many municipalities, both in Northern and Southern California, and we're happy to provide you and the Councilmember Liang and the rest of staff that information. It's all publicly available about which measures and when. We've also been very involved in sales tax measures.
Okay, I'm sorry, we're limited on time and I hate to cut you short. Last year, how many of these taxes have you worked on and how many successful?
I would say that we've worked on dozens. I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but I'm, again, happy to provide you that information.
Okay, Thank you. Yes, I'd like that information. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple questions, I think mostly for the city attorney, Ms. Houston. One is, I think that there are some limitations on how, or some implications, I should say, on if you too closely define a project and then go out for bonds for that specific project, then at some point, depending on, and this is what I'm asking is where's that line of definition? You have to have done your CEQA analysis beforehand. Otherwise, you can do the CEQA when you actually do the project. Can you help me with where that line is?
Yes, so if it's going to be a bond measure or ballot measure put on by the local legislative body, that is a project subject to CEQA. And if we have a specific project, a specific location, it's going to be sort of this big or that big, we will need to do CEQA before it gets put on the ballot. If it's just a,
Can you speak directly into your mic a little more?
okay, I'll get here closer. Yes, so if it's specific enough that it is a project, it will be a project subject to CEQA. So we will have to do some sort of environmental review for the ballot measure. If it's just a general public facilities tax that could be used for police, fire, senior center, and something else, improving dog parks as well, and all that, it would still be subject to CEQA, but it could come under an exemption as a revenue source. Fares, tolls, and rates are revenue raising. It could be exempt. So all of these will be some sort of project subject to CEQA. It's just what level of CEQA we will do. On the other hand, if the citizens do an initiative and it qualifies, has enough signatures, and it's submitted to the local legislative body, the legislative body can put it out for a vote, or they can adopt the measure as is. And that is seen, it's still subject to CEQA project. So how close we get to defining it is, then that will trigger the CEQA review.
Okay, because that obviously has something to do with both how we might want to define something and also the timing. So there's a trade-off there. And then my other question, just to clarify, and I'm going way back to Measure A, which was a while ago. But do I remember correctly that although as Mr. Kim has been explaining, they could put messaging together to explain messaging and so on, were there to be a bond measure brought, or any sort of tax measure brought forward, we couldn't actually run a campaign for it, that there has to be, or there can be, another entity, not us, but perhaps by a group of interested citizens that would do the yes on, if you will. So can you either confirm or clarify that for me, please?
Yes, so if we're going to sponsor a ballot measure, what usually happens is the city council puts the language, we get it on to the ballot, send it off to the registrar. Usually what happens after that is citizen groups called Friends of Measure A, Friends of the Library, Friends of, this ballot measure. They can go out and educate and also spend money in the education. But the city council and city staff cannot use city funds to help promote or help advocate for or against the measure. We can use city funds for education. And so there's always that fine line with what is education and what kind of funds are going to be used for education. And so I could go on and on, but
No, that I think you've helped me there. And then my last question, which is back to the subcommittee, is what is the deadline date for us if we were to submit a measure for the 2022 ballot, November 22 ballot?
isn't the last time to put a ballot measure on, I think that August 8th or 10th, something like that.
August 12th, I think.
Oh, it's 12.
August 12th, the last regular meeting we have before then is in June, I believe. That's what the subcommittee put on the calendar on the report. I don't know if we're able to schedule a special meeting, if we simply need additional time to consider some factors, or if any decision we make would have to be done at a regular meeting. If it has to be done at a regular meeting, we have to have our final direction in by the end of June.
Okay. Great. All right. Why don't we go? Oh, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I think maybe it might be good to give City Manager England a last chance if he wants to clarify anything that we've talked about, particularly if he feels, I know the reality of the timeline or not is of concern. So City Manager England, do you want to pick up on anything that we've been talking about and offer some clarifications?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I think overall the conversation has been very helpful. It brought out a lot of things that the subcommittee had considered and some things the subcommittee had not. For us to move forward, council is going to have to start providing a path and direction for us. And the only thing I would say is over the next 2 weeks, if there's things that we certainly can eliminate, the less things we're polling, the less things we're trying to track down. I think the better chance we have of making our timeline. June is right around the corner, and we have kind of a late start date on this. So I would just urge the council, if we're going to move forward, anything that's off the table that we can take off quickly would be helpful.
And
okay, so do either members of the subcommittee want to say anything further on your opinions about things? If not, I will go to council members Flagger and Liang for their comments on where they want to go. But I'm going to ask the subcommittee if you want to make any comments before I do that. Nope. Okay, Councilmember Flagger, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to respond to what Mr. England just said, and looking at what the ask of the council is for today's study session. And as we all know, there's no motion for study session and no decision. But for me, I am definitely comfortable with the subcommittee continuing to work in the direction they have proposed. The current recommendation states that, allow staff to start preparing the ballot measure. And for me, I'm not there yet to give that kind of direction, because I think we need a lot more information before I would vote at a regular meeting to say, yes, definitely, this is what we need to do for November 2022. But I am very supportive of the subcommittee continuing to work in this direction. And if that's what they will bring back to us in March at our next regular meeting, asking us just again to give them the green light to continue on, that's something I would be open to. But I'm definitely not at the point today, based on what I've heard, because I do think there's still a lot of outstanding questions and options to be considered to say, definitely move forward, start preparing the ballot measure for November 2022.
Can you comment if there are any specific critical pieces of information that you think you would need in 2 weeks?
No, because I think so the polling is very important to me, and I know it's important to residents as well. And I know that's not something that they could get done. So as they look at the timeline and knowing the importance of this polling piece, I would want that to be put on the front end so that we can start getting that data. So hiring the political consultant and the polling firm and start working on that as soon as possible. Because in order for me down the road, whether it's May or June, to actually say, yes, go forward, this polling piece is very important to me. And I also think the subcommittee needs to fine tune what tax measure they're really seeking in their communication. Because again, reading the staff report and even at the beginning of this discussion, it wasn't clear to me if it was a specific tax or a general tax, and also why they were recommending the property tax over, a sales tax, or even the parcel tax was clear, so there are a lot of things I think they need to fine tune as a committee, but nothing that I see as a showstopper or prohibitive in having them continue to move forward.
Okay, Councilmember Liang.
Thank you. I am concerned that we're not moving forward. We're not giving clearer direction. I'm concerned that just saying moving forward is not good enough, because it's everything. I think it's too broad. I think we need to clean it up. If we're saying public service facilities is what our target is, I think we need to say public service facilities important. I do not support a broad general public facility bond at this time. I really feel that understanding and studying all the different cities and their attempts to have a police station or a fire station built, how much it costs and how much, like Councilmember Weinberg had acknowledged, the cost has gone up already since Palo Alto has broken ground. There's 87 million has already gone up. So I just think that after, it'll go up much more too with all the change orders and as they continue to do construction. I think as acknowledged, there is an urgency. Yes, rising interest rates and our facilities is not in good shape, but we need to move forward. I am all for definitely doing a new police station. And I think it's important to include the fire department. So calling it public safety is the direction I think we should go. I believe actions taken by some council members last year has caused people to have anti-police sentiments. These anti-police sentiments were unwarranted, but they exist in our community and will hurt the chances of a bond being passed if it's just for a police department. If it is rushed and not properly structured, we will continue to not be successful as well. We have a lot that we are focusing on in the next few months, such as our housing element, and I think that will also be limiting our attention. I believe we should be clear on what direction we want to go. I personally feel that the sales tax measure would be more successful. I think it's the direction that we can move forward on and move forward within this year. And we can have more support for such a measure. It's an option to use for operations and our public safety CIP. It gives us some revenue and time to do a thorough job on larger amounts needed. If we feel that we are not getting enough funds from the sales tax increase, we can continue to study on whether we want to move forward on property tax, parcel tax, or UUT. What happens is it would also lessen the amount that we would be burdening our residents with. And it gives time for us to educate the public why such a bond measure would be our next step if needed. So I think that a sales tax can be done, and we could have them look at whether a 0.5% sales tax would be a good way to start. And it would allow us as well to have time to seek advice for our finance commission, who are financial experts, if we want to pursue another bond option in the future. I just feel that with the limited time, we want to move forward. We want to be successful, and that would be the better way to go. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So I'm in agreement that the subcommittee should go forward. I'm also in agreement that we want to take care of our public safety facilities, but we don't get a chance to have a do-over. I think all of us were around this city during the Measure A, which was unfortunately, and I'm going to take, I don't know to what Councilmember Weinberg was referring earlier when he talked about prior councils, putting their fingers on the scale or whatever. What I remember about Measure A is that the polling showed it wouldn't be successful and the council went forward anyway. So I think that, we don't want to be in that kind of a position. And therefore, we really need to be sure that we take the time to get this right. In the next couple of weeks, what I would like to see coming back is a much more detailed timeline of what has to happen when. I am frankly terrified that we cannot get this done in time without compromising the work we're doing on the housing element. And I think that would be catastrophic. We cannot let the housing element slip and not meet the critical dates for the housing element. We simply can't do that, no matter what. To me, that is job one. If we fail on that, we have collectively failed as a council, no matter what we would do in this regard. So a detailed timeline with assurances from staff as to how we can actually do that in the context of the housing element. More potential cost information on other sites so that we have some notion of what kind of dollars we would want to be talking about and whether that makes sense without, again, getting ourselves in trouble with, I'm mindful of what the city attorney said about the specificity and CEQA and all that kind of thing. I'm a little bit intrigued by what I think I'm hearing from Councilmember Liang, and that is the possibility of going for a sales tax for 2022, and then potentially the time to go for a bond in 2024. Is that what you were? Yeah, your head's going up and down. So that's what, so I'd like the advisors to consider that as a possibility. We are one of the few cities that has no sales tax. Many cities in this county have a sales tax. We have no city imposed sales tax. And while I did rough calculations earlier today, and I understand the idea that no, it can't get us to the facility help that we need, given the time frame that would be involved in designing and doing a new police station, then I think there is the possibility that it would accumulate the funds for design and prep for a building that might then actually give us the time to do a CEQA and improve the likelihood of getting a successful bond. Because I think one of the things we have to test in the polling is the specificity that our public will require before they will vote for something, because that was what shot us collectively as a city with Measure A. We took the approach, give us the money and then we'll figure out what, approve the money and then we'll figure out what we're going to build. And that absolutely did not fly. So I'm still very mindful of that. And given the uncertainties that arose out of COVID, I'm also concerned as to whether people are going to be of a mind in November to commit to spending more money in one way or another with encumbering the parcels with either a parcel tax or a property tax. So those are some of my concerns. Those are a couple things that I'm looking for from the committee timeline, from the advisor, an approach in the polling that would really give us good information on how much specificity people need before they'll give us a yes. Councilmember Flagger.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to join your comment and Councilmember Liang's comment about, for me, it's one of two things, either being very specific, saying it is a public safety and you identify or police station and the 2 fire stations, or we do the general measure as I think the subcommittee was originally recommended, but with the advisory measure, because I do think, and do not want to put the cart before the polling horse, because I do think the polling will be very telling. But I do think knowing our voters to date, being specific about how we're going to use these funds could sway a lot of voters versus just saying exactly what the mayor said that happened with Measure A. This is how we're going to use it. I think that, and again, let's do the polling, but just based on my knowledge of our community, I think that could be very compelling.
I'm going to ask the city manager and Mr. Kim whether there's anything that they've heard from us that they want clarification on, because I'm sure that the subcommittee knows what we've said.
Thank you, Mayor. So looking at the list, some of the items the council's asking for, we may want to provide after we engage the polling company and the ballot measure consultant, as opposed to in the next 2 weeks. So as the subcommittee said at the beginning, a very high and broad level. Right now, what it seems like council would like us to do is engage with the experts, primarily the polling company, work with Stiefel to get a more accurate calendar in place, and then bring back information on sales tax analysis specifically, as well as some of the differences between a parcel tax or a property tax. These items can be done in 2 weeks, and then allow the subcommittee to continue their work and refine their approach as they get direction from council.
And Mr. Kim's nodding his head. So did you want it? I got thumbs up, so nothing else. I see Councilmember Liang, do you have one more thing you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just heard them say property tax or property tax. I didn't hear anything about sales tax.
Councilmember Liang.
I heard the city
sales
manager
tax
talk
was-
about
Okay.
sales tax.
Okay, if you got the sales tax component, that's good. And I think we should also have clear numbers from, because I believe JA has been collecting data, and we should have a rough estimate, shouldn't we?
A very rough estimate, yes, in 2 weeks. Again, determining the type of tax is going to be important to the specificity of the projects that come forward.
All right.
And so just to clarify one more thing, when we talk about sales tax, then when you talk about parcel and property tax, did you also consider how it would be if it was staggered as well to do a sales tax increase? Then it would also help determine whether it would be a smaller parcel or property tax, right?
Yeah, Councilmember Liang, we can look at the annual that a sales tax would raise. We can also look at whether a potential bond or a potential revenue raising measure would have a sunset or a defined period. We can bring that back in 2 weeks.
Okay, that's great. Anything more? Then I want to thank the subcommittee, thank the staff, thank Mr. Kim and others who've been working on this and who are continuing to work on this. And at 6:43, we are adjourned.